When Rome conquered the Mediterranean, 3rd century BCE, 4th century CE, Latin became the administrative and military language of that empire. Whenever Roman soldiers, settlers, and merchants went, Latin followed. That's how it reached Spain and Portugal, France, southern Britain, the Balkans, and North Africa. North of Rome lived the Etruscans, a highly cultured people whose writing system came from the Greek alphabet. Around the 7th century BCE, Romans borrowed the alphabet from the Etruscans. That's how Latin first appeared in written form. So speech was theirs, but writing was inherited from older Mediterranean civilizations. The Phoenicians had already developed sea trade, mathematics, and the alphabetic principle that made all of this possible. Greek culture itself drew on Egyptian and Mesopotamian science and symbolism. So when Rome learned from Greece, it was indirectly learning from the much older African and indigenous and Near Eastern sources. Egypt emphasized cosmic order and balance, called Mayat, more than codified law, so its justice system was spiritual and communal rather than legalistic. So, from about 2000 BCE onward, peoples around the Mediterranean, the Cretans, Phoenicians, Greeks, absorbed elements from both Egypt and Mesopotamia. The Phoenicians passed on alphabets and maritime trade. The Greeks studied Babylonian astronomy and Egyptian geometry, systematized them into philosophy and logic, and spread those ideas west. The Romans later translated that intellectual heritage into written law, engineering, and administration, the template that medieval and modern Europe inherited. By the time Europe organized itself after Rome's fall, its knowledge base was a remix of Mesopotamian bureaucracy and law codes, Egyptian sacred geometry and temple science, Greek rational philosophy, Roman engineering and governance, merged Arab mathematics, medicine, and architecture. Europe repackaged those legacies under new names, sometimes forgetting or erasing the older sources. So instead of the law we have now, the original law closer to God and fairness was called Mayat. Mayat wasn't just a law, it was the divine order of the universe. She was both a goddess and a principle, the balance that keeps creation in harmony. It covered truth, justice, harmony, reciprocity, right relationship between people, nature, and the divine. To live in Mayat meant you were in alignment with cosmic truth. Your actions kept the flow of life balanced. Egypt didn't have statute books like later civilizations. Instead, judges, priests, and even the pharaoh himself were expected to do Mayat, meaning to apply fairness and divine order in every situation. Pharaoh as upholder of Mayat. So the pharaoh's sacred duty was to establish Mayat and destroy Esfet, which is chaos. If Egypt suffered famine, war, or disorder, it meant Mayat had been disturbed, and the ruler had to restore balance through fair governance and temple rituals. Courtrooms, local courts heard disputes over land, theft, family matters, etc. Judges, often priests, took an oath to rule according to Mayat. They relied on character, witness statements, and the ideal of truth rather than rigid written codes. Lying under oath was not only illegal, it was a spiritual offense against Mayat. Fair measurement, honest trade, and care for the poor were considered Mayatic duties. Merchants who cheated weights or hoarded grain were seen as creating Esfet, imbalance that could bring famine or divine disfavor. Government officials were praised for being men of Mayat, honest, humble, and just. Corruption was viewed not just as a crime, but as a disruption of divine harmony. Ordinary Egyptians practiced Mayat through kindness, moderation, generosity, and truthfulness. Doing Mayat kept one's life force light and pure, essential for the afterlife. Mayat represents law as alignment, not punishment. Instead of controlling behavior through fear, it invited people to live in truth, balance, and reciprocity. Egypt's system leaned toward restoration and balance rather than pure punishment. The goal wasn't to get even, but to repair the disturbance in Mayat, to make things right for the community, the offended person, and the cosmic order. When someone wronged another, officials looked for ways to return stolen goods or compensate fairly, apologize publicly or before the gods, work off a debt or offense through labor or fines. But make no mistake, serious crimes were punished. They just balanced moral correction with practical repair. Each town had a council called the Kinbet or the Dajet, often led by priests or elders. They heard disputes much like today's judges. Cases included things like property theft, inheritance, marriage, divorce, assault, etc. Instead of citing written laws, judges would weigh the case using witnesses, documents, and character testimony, also always invoking Mayat. So police and courts mirrored the emperor model, hierarchy, fear, and profit in today's system. Private prisons, bail systems, and endless fines. Victims seldom restored, offenders rarely healed. Law still sees chaos is felt as something to crush, not to understand and rebalance. So, what would it look like if Justice Remember Mayat? Restorative justice programs that bring victims and offenders together. Community mediation instead of criminalization. Environmental law rooted in reciprocity with earth. Ethics of truth-telling and leadership in media. 1 second. Centralization and bureaucracy. Instead of local councils or elders, decisions move through remote institutions. Corporate economics. Many laws are written to protect property and markets, first echo in the industrial era rather than community balance. Legal formalism. Courts prize procedure over spirit. Truth becomes whatever can be proved on paper. Distant from moral cosmology. Systems like Mayat tied ethics to the cosmos. Modern law ties it to precedent and statute. The result is a system that functions efficiently on paper but often feels soulless in practice. In the 1970s to 1990s, a mix of anti-tax and common law court movements argued that when governments issue birth certificates or use all caps names, they secretly create a corporate alter ego. They said debts, taxes, or criminal charges apply only to that entity, not to the flesh and blood person. Courts in every common law country have reviewed those arguments and found no legal basis for them. The capitalized name convention simply follows typesetting rules. It doesn't generate a separate being. However, modern law does treat persons as legal subjects. That includes natural persons and artificial ones, companies, trusts, and governments. When you sign a contract or appear in court, you act as a legal person, the recognized representative of yourself. It's not a fraud, it's the formal way law tracks rights and responsibilities. Even if the doctrine isn't legally true, the emotion behind it is real. The sense that bureaucracy only sees paperwork. Your identity is reduced to ID numbers and signatures. Courtrooms feel scripted and detached from moral dialogue. Corporations and governments can act like persons while individuals feel powerless. That alienation is what the strawman story symbolizes, a cry for recognition of the living moral self inside a paper system. We've built systems that recognize documents better than they recognize people. The task now isn't to escape the system with paperwork, it's to reinfuse it with humanity.